Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I ready to continue part 2 of the Pacific Division season preview. Justin, how's life going? You know, it's been we missed a week, and that's my bad. Probably it's usually my fault that we miss a week, but we missed a week, and we're gonna make up for it this week with the Pacific Division and the Central Division.
Yeah, I am thoroughly disappointed I didn't get my Mark Paul fix in last week. So, all I can really say is, hopefully we make up for it today with a little bit more loving. And, let's kick it off. Let's go.
All right, let's head out to Calgary, as we've done all of California. And it's time we hit the Canadian teams in this Pacific Division. If you didn't hear the other part 1 of the Pacific Division, just swing on over and subscribe to the show, and you can listen to us do LA Kings, San Jose Sharks, the Seattle Kraken, and the Anaheim Ducks. But the Calgary Flames, a team that they added players, they subtracted players, and we'll go through those real quick. Blake Coleman, obviously the biggest acquisition for the Calgary Flames, signs a big deal with them. Eric Goodbranson, Brad Richardson, Trevor Lewis, Nikita Zadorov comes in a trade with the Blackhawks. They get Tyler Pitlick, the Kraken's, I think their first trade after the expansion draft, and then Daniel Vladar from the Bruins, backup goaltender. But they lose Mark Giordano, Dominic Simon to the Penguins, and Derek Ryan to the Edmonton Oilers. So I'd say that they did add more than they lost, but it's almost like they added a lot of, outside of Blake Coleman, a lot of middling, bottom 6, bottom pairing type of players. And there's a lot of question marks about this team. We'll get into some of those, the bigger questions for the year, but what are your thoughts on what they did? Obviously trying to make a push. They're not just sitting around waiting to go in last place or anything and getting a high draft pick. What is this team doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this team is definitely in a limbo situation. Obviously, we know Giordano's gone. They've lost their captain, so leadership is missing. Blake Coleman, he is definitely, to me, a middle 6 type of guy. So they bring in a guy who is can grind a little bit and chip in here and there. Is he worth $4.9 million? In my opinion, no. But obviously, that was the price to pay to add a guy like that had was such a crucial piece to Tampa Bay's back-to-back cups. And so, for me, when I say limbo, right, I think everybody's been hearing the rumors now for quite a while, and Johnny Hockey and Sean Monahan, these two guys, might not be back after this year. So who knows what you're going to get, right? So obviously they've got to make some sort of push here. They've got to show the fans, they've got to show this team that say, hey, we are for real. We're making strides. We're getting there. I mean, obviously last year they brought in a great goaltender, in my opinion, of Jacob Markstrom, a guy who really solidifies that number 1 spot for them. At this point, we'll see maybe who their top pairing is going to be on D. Obviously, Giordano's not there anymore, and so who fills that role? They did go out and they signed a couple guys. They brought in Eric Branson, Michael Stone. So we'll see if they can fill that by committee, because in my opinion, I think he is going to be missed. His leadership will be missed, and so we'll see who really fills in there.
Yeah, certainly it's also, I mean, you lose Giordano for nothing. That's really what hurts, the fact
nothing.
that this next year he could have played for them, and if they weren't in a playoff spot, they would have probably been able to get a first-round pick for him. Especially if he was playing anywhere near his Norris Trophy winning season a couple years ago. So I'm looking at the way that the Flames have kind of patched things together, like you said, and going, is Blake Coleman enough? Now, it was like this team had career years, and then the next year they just fell off the map, and everyone had like career worst seasons. I think you don't have to look further than Johnny Gaudreau to look at and go, all right, like what's going to happen with this guy? He probably is the biggest question mark headed into the season. He's a UFA after this year, and I mean, if they keep him and this team, let's say this Pacific Division is bad. The Flames probably last year in the North Division, they, barring a couple other circumstances. They could have maybe been the fourth best team in that division, but now in the Pacific, where really there's just two teams, Vegas and Edmonton, and the rest of it's kind of a crapshoot, at least according to on paper. They have a real opportunity to make the playoffs, but beyond, hey, let's make the playoffs, I just don't see what this team could do. I mean, I guess the biggest comparison I've seen is, well, they're kind of like Montreal. I've seen that out there. Like, oh, if they just get a little bit better in certain areas, they get a little luckier, they'll be like Montreal. And then, who knows? And so maybe this is the 1 year that you go, well, who knows? Let's try it one more time and we'll figure it out next year.
Right. But at that point, it might be too late, right? Because, Johnny Gaudreau may say goodbye. And then, I mean, honestly, things are going to start to fall apart. You're going to lose your number one point producer. Yes, they've got Matthew Tkachuk, a guy who I think is poised to be the next captain of this team and future leader. But, at what point does Sean Monahan say, okay, cool, Johnny Hockey's gone. It's basically just me and Elias Lindholm and Tkachuk here at this point. Sean Monahan, again, he's not going to get a huge return. His production last year dipped heavily, and at 28 points and a -6 overall in 50 games, that's not going to net you a big return for a guy who still has, yes, another year on his contract, but not many teams can squeeze a guy in there at $6+ million, and so
right, unless you're willing to eat half of it, and
right.
I mean, is Monahan as bad as he was last year? I don't think so.
I agree with you.
I think he's on a really good team. He's a third line center. Problem is, in Calgary, he's a third line center right now on a not great team. And I mean, you look at who's ahead of him, and you go, okay, all right, that's Elias Lindholm. Probably he's going to center that top line, and then you've got Michael Backlund coming in and centering the second line, and I think he slides all the way down again. And I mean, barring injury, really, what are you gonna get for him? Maybe a second round pick, probably generous right now. And that maybe would be a team that goes, okay, he can slot in as our third line center, and we'd be much better with Monahan as our third line center in comparison to X. Like, imagine Vegas going out and getting Sean Monahan and not having to. Their center position is pretty weak. Chandler Stevenson, their number one center. Maybe you say Carlson is their number one center, but Chandler Stevenson playing up in the lineup. You look at that and go, hey, maybe a Monahan allows them to do more things. Like that's just one example. There's several teams out there who could use that third center and use them at the deadline. So it's always possible you get a team who can squeeze him in, but not likely this season, especially given his no trade clause. It's not that big of a deal, a 10-team no trade list, but I think it's a lot easier probably to justify trading Johnny Gaudreau, trading Zadorov at the deadline. There's a couple other pieces I think that are more likely to be moved this season. And I think the biggest question mark is Johnny Gaudreau.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, obviously, I think, when you talk about a Monahan trade too, I think it's more likely to come next offseason, because if you see Johnny Gaudreau get traded, if you see this team really fall off the rails and, they can't even compete in a weak Pacific Division with a team like Seattle, Anaheim, San Jose, teams that are probably going to be at the bottom, if they're right there with those teams, maybe Monahan says, okay, cool. It's time to move me. And, maybe the team looks and says, cool, let's start rebuilding, because Tkachuk, again, 23 years old, he's got some years ahead of him. So, maybe this team hits the reset button really quick if those two guys are on their way out.
Yeah. Here's the question that I just want to, I think this team is just kind of, we don't know who they are. And that's probably the biggest, who are these Flames? You could see so many scenarios playing out for this team this year. What do you think will actually happen? Put me in your action. This is your prediction for the Flames. Not necessarily make the playoffs, but what do you think they'll be?
I think they'll be competitive. They'll be in games, but will they win those games? I don't know. I think they're going to be close. The problem for me is I don't feel confident about their defense to say, hey, you know what? If they get in those close one-goal games, this defense can shut teams down completely. Yes, Christopher Tanev, I like him a lot. After that, I'm not so confident as far as a top pairing guy. Maybe Noah Hannafin comes into his own again. I know they have a lot of confidence in him to develop, and maybe it's the time where you say, okay, this guy's really just not going to develop at this point, or be that top two guy that maybe they envisioned him to be when they traded for him from the Carolina Hurricanes. But to me, I think this is a make it or break it year for him as far as, where his potential is. And so, again, outside of Tanev, I don't think they have the ability to shut teams down. So they're going to have to keep up and, win those 4-3, 5-4 games if they hope to stay in this race. And luckily for them, they're in a weak division again. And so for me, I just think this team really is going to be right there in the middle, in the thick of it, and we'll see where they finish.
Yeah, I think their success is largely dependent on other teams' demise in this division. There's other teams that I think have a bigger ceiling as far or maybe a more likely playoff berth than the Flames, but I could definitely see scenarios where the Flames do figure out a way to make the playoffs and things work out for them. I'll say, I'm just wondering if they can lock Matthew Tkachuk up to a nice long-term deal here. I think that it'll speak volumes to what this team can do and is going to do in the future. If he goes in and nobody's making a move, nobody's doing anything, he's a free agent, Johnny Gaudreau walks, it's going to probably get ugly here.
Yeah. So. And the other thing we didn't even mention, really, I mean, what about the backup goaltending position, right? I mean, Jacob Markstrom, I think, is going to keep them in games every night. He's going to do his best to keep this team competitive. But, if he can't go out there and play 70 games this season, so is Daniel Vladar the answer there? I mean, he looked mediocre in Boston last year, so they made a move for him. They've got Dustin Wolf in the minors, but, he's still 20. He hasn't really developed yet. So, what are they going to get out of a backup position that can, win them maybe 10 games out of the possible 25 I would expect a backup to play for this team?
Yeah, I mean, if the backup only wins 10 of 25 games, unless there's a lot of overtime losses, then you can go ahead and guarantee the Flames aren't going to make the playoffs. What if he's playing? Now, one of the questions that I had was, how many games does Jacob Markstrom actually play? What's his over under or his tops of his career is 60 games. He played 60 games in both 17-18 and 18-19, 43 the last 2 years. Obviously, not his fault. I mean, he played 43 out of 48 games, right? 48 games, or was it more? There was 56. Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm thinking of the lockout year. 43 out of 56. So you span that out. I mean, yeah,
that's almost 75%.
Yeah. So you're looking at probably he's playing 60 something. Now, is that more next year? Like, is he gonna? What's your over under? How about 65 games? What's your over under for Jacob Markstrom?
Oh, I would put him at the over. I could see him playing anywhere between 65 and 68 games this year. No problem. Wow. I mean, you give the backup goaltender maybe 18, 20 games at the most. And, again, that's putting him at 62 if you give the backup 20 games. So, just a few games either way. And, you've got him pushing that 65 mark. So, to me, it wouldn't shock me if I see him play 67.
Okay. All right. I love it. I'm going to say that because of what's going to happen later in the season, I think they're going to be giving him a little bit of rest. But he doesn't get hurt very often. That's my child making noises. Hi. And she was about to say that she doesn't think that Markstrom will get hurt, but towards the end of the year, you might be looking at it and going, there's no point in playing him when we're this far out of the playoffs. So that sure. Would be the one way that he doesn't get there. Now, if we're in February and they're right on the playoff bubble, he's probably playing practically every night. He might get, if they have a 3-4, he'll probably get game 2 off. But that's probably the only way he's going to get games off down the stretch. Okay, let's shift gears. We'll go to the Edmonton Oilers. the Edmonton Oilers made some big acquisitions. They really didn't lose a ton. They make a trade. They trade Ethan Bear for Warren Fogle. So they trade off the defense and acquire a forward, which is what they desperately need, is some depth at forward. James Neal gets bought out, but they bring in Duncan Keith. So, maybe Father Time loses this once for Duncan Keith. Zach Hyman signs a fatty deal with the Oilers to come in and see if he can play alongside, either Connor McJesus or anyone. Like, you could put him with anyone and he'll probably make them better. Like I saw, he could play with Draisaitl, he could play with McDavid, but he could also play down in the lineup, maybe play in that third line and try to spark some offense elsewhere. They also have Cody Ceci signs a deal there after having a good season with Pittsburgh. And I'll say this as an addition because we thought he might not. Mike Smith re-signs after a really good year. So the Oilers were pretty busy, but they've got some big question marks again. And I think number one on that list is who's going to score outside of McDavid and Draisaitl.
Yeah, that's the question, right? Because obviously they brought in Zach Hyman to help generate more offense for one of those two top lines. But again, the question is, who's going to score? Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, I think he's going to be just fine. I think he's still going to produce. Maybe, obviously not at McDavid or Draisaitl levels, but, he still has the ability to produce. And he's a great fit in that middle six, whether or not you play him on the wing with Draisaitl or you move him down to that third line center role. I think he still is going to be fantastic. To me, I'm honestly looking as far as an X factor for scoring. I'm looking at Warren Fogle. Honestly, I think not a lot of people had high expectations from Edmonton when they brought him in, but I think, the way he showed the capability to produce and just those rare moments, right, when you always are looking for third or fourth line guys to chip in, he always seemed to do that for Carolina, right? And I think when you look at his last two seasons, 20 points, 10 goals, 30 points prior with 13 goals, he can produce. And so if you maybe pair him up, again, depending on where you want to slot Zach Hyman, maybe you put Fogle on that second line and you put Nugent-Hopkins down at that third line center spot to spread out the offense maybe a little. Again, there's flexibility with that guy, and I think he's still capable of playing some good minutes and producing and chipping in a few goals here.
Yeah, I mean, he's I think at this point, the year that he in 2018-19, coming off of a big AHL year, the year before he had 28 goals in 73 games. And scored 10 goals in a really limited role for the Carolina Hurricanes. And I thought, okay, this guy could be somebody who could really score for us. I think that we now know what he is. Like he is a guy he's a bottom six guy. He could play up in the lineup because he does have a decent shot. And yeah, it'd be fascinating to see, hey, the greatest players of all time have made worse players than Warren Fogle the best goal scorer in the league that year. So weird.
I'm glad you referenced that.
Weird things can happen when you play with really good players. So I don't know if that is in the cards for this, for Warren Fogle and the Oilers, but he could certainly have a career year. I mean, he could easily have 20 goals, maybe even 25, given the right spot in the lineup. Now, if he's playing on the third line, if he's just playing with Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, I would think like a 18 goal season would be really good for Fogle. Now, if you play him way up in the lineup and he gets some crazy opportunities and setups because no one's paying attention to him, maybe he's this year's freak 30 goal scorer. I think that if you went around the league and you said, who's someone who's never scored more than 20 goals before who could get 30 this year, he might be number one on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we've got Kyler Yamamoto. He still needs a new contract, but, he's a guy who, assuming he signs and starts the season, he looked pretty good with Draisaitl last year. Jesse Puljujärvi, he looks pretty good as well. So maybe he continues to chip in and plays well. Obviously, last year was all right with 25 points, but he still managed 15 goals. And so, maybe getting in a full season with McDavid and with Hyman maybe on that top line, that would look all right. Again, I'm not sure where the coach is going to go with that, but obviously if you get to play with McDavid all year, you'll probably do all right. So obviously Hyman's going to create some space for McDavid to just destroy people. So we'll see again if he gets to play on that top line too. But
now, if Zach Hyman goes to and plays with McDavid and McDavid gets like 200 points, then is Zach Hyman automatically a Hall of Famer? Because he helped someone get to 200 points? No. One other question. We could hang on Warren Fogle all day, but I think the big focus coming into this season for the Oilers, outside of what happens with McDavid always, is can Duncan Keith turn back the clock? They bring in Duncan Keith. They don't spend a lot to get him, but he is definitely brought in to make an impact. I mean, they get rid of Ethan Bear because of his impact on the defensive side. They also bring in Cody Ceci. So this blue line is somewhat, it has a different look than it did last year. And Duncan Keith, are we going to see the Duncan Keith of, hey, I'm basically a fifth, sixth defenseman? Or is this where, he kind of gets that, you get that player who late in their career, they've got one good one left in them. Is this the one good one, or is this you got a name to sell some jerseys?
Boy, I don't think they have to worry about selling jerseys, right? I think they got a couple of guys that can do that for them, but I get where you're going with that. But for me, I think this is all about utilization, right? You find the right spots to use this guy. And again, that's limited minutes. You put him maybe on that second power play because they've got their workhorse and Darnell Nurse. He's going to go out there and pop over 25 minutes a night on that blue line. Tyson Barrie, I still think he's a capable guy to put on your second pairing and maybe can lead that first power play unit. Looked really, really good last year. And so hopefully if things continue, again, I don't think they'll worry about having to pay Duncan Keith money to play, those bottom pair minutes. But for me, obviously, I'm just a little bit more concerned with the money they spent on their back end. Obviously, they gave Darnell Nurse a big extension at $9.2 million. While I think he's worth being paid like a top two defenseman, I don't think he's worth being paid that kind of money compared to some of these other, defensemen that are signed at that money. But again,
now, some of it is the fact that he did give it, like, these are UFA years.
Sure.
That's a big, big factor. I think all of them are UFA years. So that's a huge factor. As well, Edmonton, in order to get guys to stay in Edmonton, you got to pay. Like, that just is the reality. So, are they probably having to spend an extra $250,000 to $1 million a year more to keep them in Edmonton? Probably. And that's really where I think the challenge is in certain markets, is you sometimes have to overpay guys to stay, and therefore there's not the money for depth players, which, hey, the Oilers are seeing that. Granted, Leon Draisaitl should be paid $11 million, $11.5 million, maybe almost the same as Connor McDavid is, but he's making $4 million a year less. So who's the true hero on this team?
So for me, the other big question mark too is, right, I got to look at what this team did at the draft too. I look at them with a goaltending problem here coming down the pipes. They have nobody to eventually get there, and they went ahead and traded with obviously the Red Wings traded up, got their goaltender, and then lo and behold, what are the Oilers do? They trade with Minnesota and let the second best, or maybe the first best goaltender, depending on who you ask, Jesper Wallstedt, go to Minnesota when they could have snatched up this guy and potentially had their starting goaltender, in a couple of years after Mike Smith's deal runs out.
I'll say this, though, as far as the current management goes, Ken Holland is, I'm sure, looking at a goalie in the draft going, well, that's 5 years from now. I'm probably not going to be the GM 5 years from now if we haven't won a cup. So I'm not going to worry about that. Now, see, that's some of the problem, is that, a GM the guy who makes the ultimate decision on who you're going to draft, he's thinking about his job. Now, how many goalies have gone later, much later than they should, because they usually aren't ready till they're 22 or 23, when really, if you were thinking like, what's the best thing for the team long term, well, then you're probably taking a goalie earlier. But because of the late development, you just say, well, I'll just get a guy in free agency. At least most general managers do. The really good ones, like Steve Yzerman, he drafts really good goaltenders.
Yeah, luckily for Edmonton, I will say this. Obviously, Kakkonen's deal is up after this season, but they do have some interesting options next offseason. I mean, there's a lot of interesting names like Darcy Kemper, if they don't get him re-signed in Colorado, Merzlikins, Korpisalo, again, Gorgiev and in New York. So there's going to be some names out there that potentially they could go out and, again, fill the hole and, maybe not have to worry about that missed draft pick there. So
yeah, everyone loves filling a good hole. Ultimately, last thing on the Oilers playoffs, all that really matters. They're there now. Like, they've made it. They clearly are a good team. Now let's see what you can do. And until they have playoff success, almost everything else is moot. Other than hey, we'd love to see Connor McDavid go ham and put up some huge numbers, but I think it's playoffs, it's winning rounds. Much like they're very similar, very much in the same boat as the Leafs. Like, you better win a round in the playoffs, or people are going to lose their minds. Now, maybe Leafs fans are like 1 year ahead of the Oilers, but I think that Connor McDavid is probably right there. Like, we better start doing something in the playoffs, or I'm going to go all Jack Eichel on your ass.
Right. And luckily for Edmonton, they don't have to face Winnipeg again this year. I would say as long as they don't face Vegas in the first round, I think they might be all right.
Perfect. Okay, let's head over to Vancouver. Probably, for my money, the most interesting team coming into this year in the Pacific Division, from the perspective of this team really did their best to improve. I think out of any team in this division, they improved the most, in my opinion, and they are going for it. Like, this team is ready to roll, and based on the players they brought in, they're definitely trying to make the playoffs, and they're trying to win a round, which would be fascinating, to say the least. They are likely looking to play the role of spoiler, because you're probably either going to get Edmonton or Vegas in the first round, and that'll be a good time for whoever has to pull that draw. The Canucks add Connor Garland and Oliver Ekman-Larsson in a trade. They grab Jason Dickinson from the Dallas Stars. Yaroslav Halak signs with them as a backup goalie. And Tucker Poolman signs that fatty deal for a guy that only 13% of hockey fans actually know who he is. And then I wanted to put this guy on here, Vasily Podkolzin. I think that's how you say his name. It looks like he's going to make the team, and he could play up in their top six. He's going to be like the next. You've got Brock Besser and Pedersen. He's going to likely be the next Vancouver Canuck player to hit and to do really well. So that he's a big game changer. They lose Jay Beagle, Antoine Roussel, which those two guys signed the same offseason. Both of them gone. Louis Eriksson, bye-bye. Nate Schmidt pieces out. Braden Holtby, the experiment failed. And longtime Canuck, actually forever Canuck, Alex Edler finally decides to get out of there, heads down the coast to L.A.
Yeah, I'm excited for this team, to be quite honest. I'm with you. I think they're an interesting team where I think we're like a team like Calgary, where I can't quite figure out where they're going to be. I'm more interested in where this team's going to be, just because of all the moves they made, and I think they're poised to make some noise. I mean, they could. I mean, assuming they get Elias Pettersson signed, they could be such a fun team to watch game in and game out. Because I mean, for me, I love Bo Horvat, JT Miller, the defensive two-way game that those guys bring, and Elias Pettersson obviously is a lot of fun to watch. And if Brock Besser can stay healthy and score some goals, I mean, the additions of Connor Garland, he's going to add some really nice depth for this team. And Tanner Pearson, if he can still find his game and still play with some spunk to him, I think this could be really, really exciting to watch this Vancouver team. And especially, again, in this division where I think there are some weaker teams where they can take advantage of and really pad their stats.
Yeah, Quinn Hughes as well needs a contract. So.
Oh, yes, of course. Of course.
That is kind of my, like, I see what they're trying to do here. I really like it. Like, I love, Connor Garland coming in is going to really solidify that top six. I think he does just that. Oliver Ekman-Larsson has been on the downslide, but also he's been on the downslide with a brutal team. I mean, it's just been rough to be in Arizona. I got to think that a fresh start for OEL is going to, he may not be this guy could win the Norris kind of OEL, but I think we're going to see the definite top four OEL here in Vancouver. He's going to get plenty of opportunities to quarterback their power play and to really be an important part to this team. Maybe that second power play, give Quinn Hughes the first and Larson the second. But I really think that he's poised to have a nice turnaround in Vancouver, which I'm sure they hope so as well, seeing as they're paying him a bunch as well. But to me, the question really coming into this year is, all right, we got to re-sign Pettersson, got to re-sign Quinn Hughes. Plus, I mean, this isn't just, hey, let's do these things and wrap it up. I mean, then you got to re-sign Brock Besser. Like, their three best players in less than 12 months all need a new contract. And that is going to be tricky. And I'm wondering if the reason why you don't see these two other guys with contracts is because they're negotiating with all three at once. Now, yeah, I haven't heard it. Like, this isn't like, oh, I heard something special down the pipeline, or I've read it. I actually haven't read that at all. But generally, I know you negotiate with guys individually. But if you go, hey, like, we've got basically our agreements with these guys. We're just trying to see if we can get all three of them done and announce them all at once. That would be, that to me, that would be big news, and it would show that they're solid, they're moving forward. I think that's a possibility. Vancouver has never been a team that's just trying to lowball people all day long. Like, they've always been a team that's willing to spend. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, what's the holdup? Because the other side of it is, I mean, I don't know about you, but Elias Pettersson's really good, and I'd be willing to sign him to a pretty big deal and have to give up a few picks for him. Are we going to see an offer sheet if he doesn't get signed here in the next couple weeks? Like, is that possible? And I mean, you got to think that that's at least somewhat on their mind. I mean, they've got probably the two best players not signed right now outside of Kaprizov.
Yeah, I will say, luckily for them, nobody can offer sheet Quinn Hughes, because that would have been done already.
Because he's on that 10.2C thing. Hasn't played enough games yet.
Exactly. Group 2 status, whatever that is. But I honestly, what I really think it is, first off, I think you look at Quinn Hughes. I think bringing in OEL kind of threw a wrench in his agent's plans as far as what they were looking for, because now you look at it and you say, okay, this guy's signed long-term. And so maybe they were looking at a long-term deal to begin with at big money, but now you look at it and say, okay, well, at 7.2, obviously maybe we want $9+ million now at this point. Maybe Quinn Hughes was thinking, okay, cool, I'll go in and I'll take a more team-friendly deal for 2 or 3 years at maybe 7.5, ish money to kind of, help get Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser signed. But now you look at it and you say, okay, OEL signed at 7.2. Well, crap, now I want $9 million, because if you think that guy's worth 7.2, I'm definitely worth more than that guy. So Maybe
in fairness, they weren't the ones that signed him to that deal.
No, absolutely not. But they went out and they made the move. They brought him in. So they knew what they were getting into. They were willing to pay him that money, obviously.
Sure.
So now they have to be willing to pay Quinn Hughes more money.
I also think you're looking at the Edmonton Oilers and looking at what they were willing to give to Darnell Nurse, $9.25 million for a bunch of UFA years. So yes, those are UFA years, but who do you want, Darnell Nurse or Quinn Hughes? Obviously, probably Quinn Hughes. But I'm thinking like he's got to be going. Well, I'm probably worth maybe not 9.2 because these are RFA years, but I mean I want my 8.5. You know, pretty darn close. Probably just for a few years. I'm sure Vancouver would like to lock him in for the next 8. And he's probably thinking, well, I don't want to be locked in for that long. You know, I'll go for 5 or for 6, so that
I don't even think he wants 5 or 6. I think honestly, Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes, they're probably like, let's do it for 3 years. Let's take those bridge deals. Then once the NHL gets past that whole helmet ads, they start bringing in the revenue. They can cash in big once that cap goes up. And I'm thinking that's what's on their minds right now. And I think Vancouver knows this, and they're trying to lock them in for 8 years for sure.
I don't disagree. I mean, obviously Vancouver is like, well, let's get these guys to huge deals, and if they were going to do that, they would have to give up quite a bit.
Sure.
Can Demko take the reins in net? You know, let's shift gears from contracts. Thatcher Demko had the great playoff. You know, Markstrom leaves. He had a pretty good year last year, a .915 save percentage. He played well. But that's in 35 games. You know, he had Braden Holtby behind him. Now, granted, Holtby didn't play that great, but he still had Holtby behind him. He's got Yaroslav Halak behind him now, who has proven to be maybe the best friend to a goalie. Like, he's not going to ever be the starter. You know, unless you get hurt, he's probably not going to be the starter. He's capable of probably still playing 30. He could probably play more than that if somebody gets hurt, but probably you're comfortable with him playing the like 25-ish games somewhere in there. He played 19 last year in a shortened season. You know, Demko playing 35. Probably this year he's going to be playing at least 50, right? Are we there? 50 games for Demko? Assuming that he's playing well, 50 games. He's never played that many games. You know, that to me is that, like, literally his entire career, he has not played that many games.
Right.
So that is, you know, he played 45 with Boston College, played 46 with Vancouver in 2017-18. But I'm sorry. With the Utica Comets, he played 46. So that's 27-18 is the last time he played more than 40 games in a year. So it's been a minute. Can he handle it?
Yeah.
That would be my big question. Can he?
Yeah, I have no doubts he's capable. I think they brought this guy in slow enough to where I think they're ready to just release him in the wild now, let him go ham. Now, you know, again, last year started off a little slow, really picked up at the end of the year, so you're hoping that success continues, and that's why they locked him in to this kind of money here at $5 million. So they're not gonna get burnt on a contract, I think, long term if he doesn't pan out. But I still think he's more than capable of putting up 50, 55 games, no problem. And luckily for them, they do have Halak back there, who I think is more than capable of handling 25 games. And not to mention, too, in the minors, they've got this other kid named Michael DiPietro, who is a pretty dang good goaltender.
Very true, yes.
Who I think will eventually be there to be that 1A, 1B punch, where I think they'll be able to give a little bit more balance to both of these guys. But for now, I think they've got a pretty good trio of goaltenders there, where I think, you know, if one guy really isn't doing well, they've got some safeguards in place to really just, in case Demko gets hurt or if he isn't playing well, right? Halak can step in there.
There's something behind him. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so, but what I'm more curious about for Halak, if he gets in that situation, right? He doesn't have the type of defensive team like Boston was in front of him to maybe shut things down and play in those tighter games. So we'll see if he can handle it.
That's true. Good point. Yes, Halak. It's been a long time since Halak's played outside of the Boston system, and Vancouver is definitely not built the same way that the Bruins are. However, they do have some really nice, like their bottom six, and that Bo Horvat line especially is poised. They're just. I mean, I'd say that they're as close to like, hey, we can kind of play that like I can play like Patrice Bergeron, like you know, a two-way game. We'll say a two-way game.
Yeah, the poor man's Patrice Bergeron.
Bo Horvat can do it. Brandon Sutter re-signing at $1.125 million, much better than the 4+ that he was making last year and in his previous contract. And he slots nicely as a fourth-line center. And then Jason Dickinson coming in as the third-line center, a very responsible player, somebody who's not afraid to use their body. And, you know, he puts up decent points, but he's definitely more the two-way guy. So I look at that and I see how the Canucks are trying to insulate some of their younger players and their younger goaltenders. So I think they're pretty poised to be able to be in a much better defensive position. I did want to draw some attention to one player. If you didn't pay attention to the Canucks last year, which to be honest was difficult at times, especially since, you know, they played 3,800 games against the Calgary Flames at the end of the year. The Vancouver Canucks second round pick in 2019, 40th overall, Nils Höglander, he had a really nice season coming down the stretch. He ended up with 13 goals, 14 assists in 56 games in what, you know, essentially is his rookie season. And when you look at some underlying numbers, his 5-on-5 stats were absolutely insane. First in shots on net, first in individual scoring chances, first in goals, second in points, first in Corsi, second in expected goal share, and however, seventh in ice time. Like,
wow.
Okay. I mean,
Not
this guy was 5-on-5 was an absolute monster for the Vancouver Canucks. When I look at what he was able to do last year, you know, now he's a year older. He's only 20 years old, and he's leading the team in those huge important categories. And he's somebody that could be the surprise, goes and puts up 50+ points for the Canucks. He's who I'd be looking at to, you know, despite the nice moves that they made, we might be looking at the end of this year and going, Nils Höglander he was the guy. Like he was the reason that the Canucks took a huge next step because suddenly they had that extra threat. And,
and that's what they need, right? Beyond Brock Besser and, you know, Elias Pettersson, they need a guy in that second line who can really do that. And so when you've got a guy like Bo Horvat who can win draws, play that gritty game, and really play good defensively, you're allowed to go out and really take those opportunities and take those extra chances that maybe, you know, other guys, you know, at center maybe wouldn't allow you to do. And so, yeah, it's a good opportunity for him. I think that second line just fits him perfectly. And as long as, you know, who knows, they might throw Connor Garland on that line too. And then man, I think he could really take off.
Yep. I love it. Vancouver is probably they're the one team that I think when I look up and down this division, if you had, you know, outside of Edmonton and Vegas, I'd say they're the most likely to make the playoffs. I don't know that they will, but I think that they are the best team besides those two teams. And so for my money, they're the third seed in this division. If I'm doing a playoff deal right now, I really like what they were able to do in the offseason.
We'll get to throw those predictions here after this last team, so
Absolutely.
I can't wait to hear it.
Yep, let's do the Vegas Golden Knights. They go out and they make some decent splashes for a team that seems always to be at or, you know, hey, they're over the cap, but who cares? It's Vegas. Evgeny Dadonov comes from Ottawa, kind of a failed experiment there in Ottawa for Dadonov, so he comes over to Vegas. Nolan Patrick in a 3-way trade with the Nashville Predators finds his way to Vegas as Cody Glass on his way out. I'll say probably the biggest addition who was already on their team but ends up re-signing, Alec Martinez. I mean, no one expected this guy to re-sign with Vegas. He is able to. A really important signing, I think, for Vegas there. Laurent Brossoit comes and signs in the backup goaltending position as Marc-Andre Fleury is on his way out, as he was traded for a puck and a pack of peanuts. And Brett Howden coming over as well to the Vegas Golden Knights. The only other big loss for the Knights, more or less in name and in reputation rather than what he actually brought to the scoreboard. Ryan Reeves goes to the New York Rangers. So the Vegas Golden Knights, they are actually going into this next season with 5 defensemen. They're going to play 5 defensemen and 13 forwards.
Wow. I like it though.
I was reading about it, and that's what they've decided to do because of their salary cap restrictions. They have no choice.
Well, what I will say is, I mean, when you look at their top 3, even their top 4, but I mean, Pietrangelo, Martinez, and Theodore, you can play those guys 25 minutes a night all day long. So
yeah, they basically said that, we're going to play Pietrangelo and Theodore all night. I think they're both going to play 30 minutes a night, and they're going to get monster minutes. That. Yeah, I think that it's it's a pretty cool experiment in hey, if you need to sign guys and that's going to leave you short. Now, Tampa Bay, they played in the playoffs with 7 defensemen and only 11 forwards. So they did kind of the opposite, which that's been done. A lot of times you can even have a defenseman go up and play as a forward for a minute, depending on who they are and how well they can skate. You can kind of shift that defenseman around. That's been done over the years. There hasn't been too many. I actually don't know of many teams that have said, yeah, we're just going to intentionally go into the year with only 5 defensemen.
Right. Bless you. Yeah. That was a good sneeze.
I think I managed to mute it before the sneeze got through, but sorry, everyone. You missed out on my sneeze. Now, big questions for this team. It's Stanley Cup or bust, right? This really, how far ahead will this team finish in the Pacific? Is kind of the attitude that this team has taken into this season, because it truly is they have to win the cup. I mean, the expectations are very high, and they've once again gone all in, and they're doing everything that they can to win this cup, and they're in the perfect division to do so because they have probably the easiest first 2 rounds out of any other team.
Yeah, I think there's 31 teams in the NHL that might look at this team and say, hey, you're still missing that number 1 center to be that elite threat in the Stanley Cup Finals. But I think Vegas is looking at it, and I think, gosh, I even think Peter DeBoer or Kelly McCrimmon, I can't remember who it was, came out and said, hey, I think we're okay with where we're at, and, I don't think we have a number 1 center problem. So, kudos to them. I think obviously that's the reason they brought in Nolan Patrick as well. They were willing to make that 3-way trade because they think this guy who was, a former high draft pick, number 2 overall, I think they feel that this kid still has, again, outside of the health issues, I think if he can stay healthy, I think they feel with the right ice time and right partners that maybe he could potentially be that guy for them. Obviously, I think they're keeping their fingers crossed because you don't want to go in with Chandler Stevenson as your number 1 center to, face the team in the East. Maybe say, I don't know, you throw in another, Braden Point or right
in your own division. You got probably going to go through Edmonton. So yeah, you're going to have to. Your center position is quite important.
Right, and I mean, when you look at a guy like Mark Stone and Max Pacioretty, right, those guys can shut down other players. They can keep up and produce offensively when needed, but they still need somebody who can dish, who can win faceoffs. And so, maybe Nolan Patrick finds that game again. Maybe he's still capable. I have my fingers crossed for him. But I mean, outside of that, right, you look at the back end, the biggest question mark for me is the goaltending. I love Robin Lehner. I think he's going to be fantastic. But now you don't have that safety net of Marc-Andre Fleury. You don't have that guy back there that is going to. I mean, they just lost their Vezina winner, so you don't have that backup to say, okay, well, if Lehner gets in a slump here, is Brisson going to come in?
In fairness, he did have a great year. Brossoit is probably one of the better backups in the NHL. I mean, last year, a 918 save percentage. Throw out the COVID year, the year before, a 9.25. He has had some really nice years.
And
he's certainly capable, especially on a really good team. I wouldn't be too worried about that. My question wasn't so much the doom and gloom. My thought was, is Robin Lehner going to take the Vezina? Like, are we going to see a team have 2 Vezina Trophy winners with 2 different goaltenders in 2 years?
I absolutely think it's more than possible. I mean, again, I really like Robin Lehner as a goaltender. I think he's a fantastic player. I mean, he's had success in Chicago, Islanders, Buffalo, even when they were just super terrible outside of, those, a couple off seasons. And I can't even blame him for that, to be quite honest. So everything else aside, he's had nothing but success no matter where he's been. So, I think it's more than capable with this defensive team in front of him, right? He's got an excellent top 3, and he's got excellent defensive forwards up front. So he is more than capable of putting up some good numbers this season.
Okay, I think it's time. It's prediction time.
Let's do it.
All right. Do you want to give your order, or do you just want to go Why don't you give your order? You go 1 through 8.
All right, 1 through 8. Okay, obviously I think number 1, I'm going to have to go Vegas here. I think they're still the team to beat in this division, and I think the team right behind them is going to get pretty close. The Edmonton Oilers, I think at number 2, they're going to produce offensively, but can they keep pucks out and play a good defensive game is going to be the question mark. So, right behind them, for me, I am going to throw in a wild card team you mentioned before, but Vancouver Canucks, I think with Pettersson, Hughes signed to start the season, and I think with maybe an extension for Besser on the way as well, I think this team is poised to look really, really good with some of the additions they made this year. At number 4, I'm going to throw in a team that maybe didn't do so hot last year, but had its moments. I like their new combination of their 1-2 punch down the middle, and that is the LA Kings for me. Coming in at number 4, I think Kopitar Deneau is going to make a fantastic 1-2 punch at the center position. Beyond that, I think it could be basically anybody's game for me. I'll go Calgary at number 5. I'll do at number 6. I'll go San Jose. I think they might surprise a few people and be a little bit better with their new goaltending situation. Then I'll put Seattle at 7, and then at number 8, the Anaheim Ducks. I think obviously maybe Gibson gets traded at some point this year, but I think ultimately this team just doesn't find it offensively and finishes at the bottom of the division.
Okay, yeah, we're on the same page. I'll just head back up the ladder. Anaheim will finish last. I think San Jose finishes 7, and I think that the Calgary Flames finish 6, the Seattle Kraken 5, the LA Kings 4, Vancouver Canucks 3, the Vegas Golden Knights 2, and the Oilers are going to take that 1 seed.
I love it.
Into the playoffs. So, I think the Oilers have a real chance. I don't necessarily think they're better than Vegas, but I think that they just have that dynamic, like maybe not better than Vegas from a playoff standpoint, but in a regular season mode, I think they're really built for the regular season. Like, it's just 2 crazy goal scorers going at it. Like, it's always going to be a portion of the regular season, a big focus. It's fun, and Vegas is just calmly going to roll along. I don't think they're really worried about being the number 1 seed in this division. In fact, it might be to their benefit to just not be the number 1 seed in this division and just kind of just take out the number 3 seed, because they're probably it'll be a good matchup. But I think that Vegas in the playoffs is the best team in this division. Are they necessarily going to go run away with the regular season? I don't know that happens. Okay, those are our predictions. Let us know what you think. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at OT Hockey Talk. And stay tuned for the Central Division, Part 1, as we go through the first 4 teams over there. And we will just continue chugging out season previews until the regular season begins early October. I can't believe we're actually a few days away from some rookie camps starting and training camp starts. And when was it? The 23rd or something like that? 21st? It's
getting there. Yeah, we're stone throws away.
Depending on the team, but yeah, we're almost there. So yeah, we'll stay tuned. We'll be pushing out more episodes as we go along here. Have a good one.